Hey guys, I'd like to welcome you to the Kortex Media Podcast, where we navigate the fast-paced world of automotive and more. I'm your host, Korson Schmidt, founder at Kortex Media. Today's guest is Frédéric Ruiz-Ramón, founder of Oniva Motors, a company that's changing the game for affordable, sustainable transportation in Africa. Their vehicles are tough, simple to repair, and adapted to real conditions of African roads and economies. I'm excited to get into this one, and thank you, Frédéric, for joining me. To start everything off, I really want you to touch on your background. What was the inspiration behind it, behind Oniva, and how did it all get started?
So Oniva got started actually as a result of a family connection. My partner and co-founder is my sister. And my sister has been working in Africa for approximately 25 years, initially helping companies invest in Africa, and then focusing more on helping Africans develop entrepreneurial businesses, especially businesses that are focused on women and youth, to help them earn a better living and develop their countries. As a result of the work she was doing, she and I would communicate, and she would tell me of the different challenges that they had. And I, at that time, was in the world of finding technologies, technologists, new products, etc., that could be used in other ways. And so she would ask me, hey, do you know where I could get such and such thing? I have the following problem. For example, an irrigation problem where there's no electricity. And I'd say, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. In this country, they have this really cool pump that they've developed that's powered by this other cool device that's made in Brazil that allows you to go into a river, pump the water out, not be connected to any electricity, and then provide irrigation. So she'd say, great, how could we get those things so that I could develop an irrigation system to help these women basically increase their productivity and get their crops to market? And so little by little, we started talking about all these problems in Africa. And one of the main problems in Africa is transportation. There's very little air transport. In any case, it would be extremely expensive. There's really not that much rail transport in most of Africa. And most of that transport was essentially established by colonial powers who were basically simply trying to find the most efficient ways to extract things from Africa and then do all of the value added processing back in their own countries. And so that leaves Africa with basically road transport. However, Africa doesn't have a very developed road system. And so you end up with the situation where you don't have enough vehicles, first of all, and second of all, you don't have a very good transportation grid. Mostly you have dirt roads. You have, of course, paved roads. There are some highways. I'm not saying everything's bad. I'm just saying that if you look at a continent that is the size of the United States, China, India, Western Europe, Turkey, and a few others tossed in there, Africa's enormous, and they don't have the transportation capabilities to help their own economies grow, to help themselves grow rather than depending on others. And when others come in, those investments tend to be focused on, obviously, the benefit for the person doing the investing. One doesn't knock that. On the other hand, those tend to be very extractive investments that don't leave much value added in Africa.
For sure.
And so this road transport system, as we dug into it, and she explained what it was really like to use it, I, as a person who would always look for solutions, I'm always looking at fixing problems, finding solutions to complex problems. And as a result, my first inclination was, well, that shouldn't be so hard. There's plenty of vehicles made out there in the world that would be just right for these conditions. Vehicles that can survive really difficult road conditions, difficult climate conditions, and a lot of abuse from their users. But it turns out that the problem isn't that simple because when you try to assemble a vehicle, let's say you get a kit, you're not saving that much money. And so we started turning this problem around saying, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? And what we realized after I spoke with a number of friends who have been in the automotive industry for approximately 40 some years, producing vehicles mostly in South America for the South American markets in Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay, Paraguay, etc. They explained to me that from a manufacturing perspective and in terms of costs and supply chains, um, the real problem was not going to be finding the right engines, the right transmissions, the right frames, those sorts of things. There's hundreds of companies in the world that produce really good stuff. It's a matter of engineering what you want and putting together the solution that you need. But the problem in terms of production, um, from our perspective, was the body. Most cars are made with steel bodies, sometimes with some other metals mixed in. But generally speaking, we take steel, we press it, we then take those panels, we weld them together, and we end up with a body. And then that body needs to be rust proofed through a process often called cataphoresis. And then you have to have the entire painting and, priming and painting process. So all of those procedures, if you do it on an industrial scale, require some very expensive machines. And they also require a lot of steady electricity. I'm choosing my words carefully because one of the challenges in Africa is that you don't have steady electricity, either because they don't have enough production of electricity and or because they don't have the distribution systems for the electricity. And so you have a lot of brownouts. So it's very hard to have an industrial operation of that nature if you don't have steady electricity. But it's also very expensive. Those machines can cost, if you could make a small micro factory, a small factory, I was quoted prices of approximately $50 million for used machines, um, just to do the rust proofing and the painting.
Wow,
And so
that's crazy.
when you start putting together a business plan, you realize you have small markets in terms of the individual countries, and you cannot amortize those investments. So we realized that we could solve the problem if we could come up with a different way to make a car body. And while we're at it, why not make one that won't be subject to the problems that typical car bodies have in an African environment, which basically means dents, rust, just a lot of abuse because of the condition of the roads and the way that cars can be overloaded. Um, and so that's what we focused on. And we came up with a new way to make a car body and a new way to assemble it that would reduce the cost of producing a vehicle. These aren't fancy vehicles. They're not highly advanced technological, electronic, etc. Quite the opposite. What you need is a vehicle that is robust, maintainable, efficient, fuel efficient, for example, and safe. And that's easy to fix. And that's what we came up with. We kind of, in a sense, people have probably seen the movie Back to the Future. In some ways, we're going forward to the past. We are going backwards a little bit in time to say the 90s, early 2000s in terms of technology, where you don't have all the computers and electronics that you have today. You have just enough to do the things that make the car extremely efficient, dependable, and safe, like anti-lock brake systems and electronic brake distribution. But you're not going to have essentially a bunch of computers on four wheels. You're going to have a car that you can actually take a mechanic, a regular mechanic, without a computer himself, can diagnose a problem and fix it, and can actually fix parts too.
Stop you there because, in my opinion, I think every vehicle we should go back to a very basic, non-technology driven vehicle because if you look back in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were making really great vehicles. They were lasting. They were probably the vehicles that have lasted the longest. They were simple. Anyone could fix those vehicles, and they did their job. I feel like now we have so much technology. One wire can get rubbed through, end up shorting it, and you have a whole wire harness you need to replace, or take hours and hours and hours to find that rubbed
You're
wire.
absolutely,
And
absolutely
it's
correct.
yeah,
And you point out something really important. In Africa, a lot of mechanics are illiterate, but
mm,
they can take a car apart down to the last gear inside of a transmission. And they can take that broken gear to a guy who has a lathe or whatever you need to make a gear and make a new gear and put it in and get that car working. And if you're in the Sahara or in the jungle somewhere, you can actually keep going. You can't do that with modern cars from Europe or the United States or
for sure.
Japan, because you have to replace electronic components. You can't fix an electronic component, you have to replace it. And that's extremely expensive. But to even know what the problem is, because they're so complex, you need a mechanic grade scanner, for example, scan tool.
Mm,
Well, those are thousands of dollars. I'm sorry, but a guy in Africa who has a mechanic shop, he doesn't have that kind of money.
yeah,
He can't afford that. And the people who own the vehicles, other than wealthy people, they don't have the money to be buying those parts and importing those parts, paying the shipping, paying the import taxes, and so forth. So you end up in a situation where you have tons of cars that are imported into Africa that were not designed for those conditions. They're great
for sure.
cars, don't get me wrong. They're just not the right cars for that environment, and they won't be for a long time, not until Africa has had a chance to develop itself, develop its infrastructure, develop its technical training, which they do have a lot of technical training institutes. In fact, Oniva, in the case of Senegal, has agreements with all of the automotive technical training institutes in the country and the best engineering schools. So the idea isn't to
Amazing.
prevent them from accessing these technologies, is simply to meet them where they are and to give them solutions to problems. Africa is the least automotive, it's the country with the fewest automobiles per population because people can't afford them on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a lot of privately owned public transportation. And that's where we focused on first, where you have
Yeah,
a number of things. Africa is a growing population. So keep in mind, Africa is 54 countries in a continent, as I mentioned, that's essentially, what, about 6 times bigger than the continental United States?
yeah,
Don't look at the Rand McNally map. Everybody's used to seeing that. But Greenland is not as big as it looks on the map. And Africa is not as small as it looks on the map relative to things way up north and way south. So you have a continent with all of these countries, huge climatic variation, although in general you don't have a spring, summer, fall, and
mm-hmm.
winter. You have a rainy season and a dry season. And let me tell you, in the rainy season, if you have a road that's made out of dirt, it becomes a mud path. And so you
Yeah,
need a car with higher ground clearance, lower torque, a manual transmission. You have more control over it. And you need a car that is just easy to fix.
mm-hmm.
Um, that's not what we're making in the US, in Europe, in Japan, etc. What we're making are vehicles that work great in our environment. Um, and we can, to be honest, one of the problems we're having in the States, as you pointed out, is it's getting hard even for Americans to afford to buy a new vehicle, let
Yeah,
alone to maintain it
mm-hmm.
because of the way they're made.
Yeah, totally agree. Um, I know last time we spoke, you went a little bit further in depth with the shipping fees and the taxes for someone
Yes.
wanting to buy a vehicle in Africa. Do you mind just expanding a little bit on that?
Yeah,
Because
no, no,
that's a
no, no problem at all. So, as I pointed
huge
out,
aspect.
no, that's a great question. So, as I pointed out, so you have a population of 1.5 billion people, which, by the way, over the next 25 years will grow to 2.5 billion people. This population is very young. The mean age is approximately 19 years old, and it will grow younger. So you have this enormous market opportunity of a continent that doesn't have that many vehicles, and that has a growing population of young people who need them.
Hmm.
So what do they do now? Because they can't afford what we're doing. I mean, here we are in the States selling cars for 30,000 bucks new, and that's if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Um, so imagine getting a vehicle, a brand new vehicle, assuming you could afford one, in India or China. And you can get some very good vehicles actually in those places. They're excellent vehicles that are durable for, say, around $15,000. But I'm in Africa. I need to get it to Africa. So that's going to cost quite a few $1,000s. Obviously, the shipping rates vary all the time, but let's say approximately 5,000 bucks to get your vehicle to Africa. It could be 1,000, it could be 7,000, but let's just say 5,000 just for simplicity's sake. So a $15,000 vehicle plus 5,000 bucks is now a $20,000 vehicle. And then you arrive at the port in Africa, and like any port, they have handling costs, port costs. So in Senegal, it's quite expensive, for example. It's approximately $2,000 for a 40-foot container. So now you've got a $22,000 vehicle, right? And now you have to pay import taxes. Now, those vary by country. So in some places, they're very low, but on average, you're going to pay 25 to 60%. So just to make the numbers easy, let's say 50. So 22,000 plus another 11,000, you now have a $33,000 vehicle, and you still have some expenses. And if you did all this and you want to sell the vehicle, you obviously need to add a profit margin. So you're not going to sell that vehicle for less than $35,000 to $37,000. And that's a $15,000 vehicle. So you could do the math all over again with, say, a $20,000 or a $30,000 vehicle, and you can quickly appreciate that very few people can afford a new vehicle. And that's just the basic one. So do the same math with a used vehicle. And this is where really things get problematic. So all those cars that got flooded in Florida, they get shipped to Africa. Because here, an insurance company will total it simply from the electronics. They're like, it's not worth it. Not in the context of the United States. Take vehicles from Europe. Take vehicles from all sorts of places in the world. They get shipped to Africa. And so now you have all these vehicles that get repaired in Africa and they start tootling around, but they end up with problems. So those vehicles are selling for around 15,000 bucks because once you do all the math, you end up with a $15,000 to $20,000 vehicle. So maybe they can just afford it and they buy these vehicles, but then they break down. And you have thousands and thousands and thousands of vehicles in cities all over Africa that are just covered in dust because they were working, there's a problem with it, electronics, something, and then you have to do all that math all over again for that $500 electronic part and wait 6 months for it to come in. So you have this enormous problem that vehicles simply are not designed for the conditions that they're being used in Africa, and they're simply unaffordable, which is why we said, well, step number one is you got to make them in Africa because you're going to, when you do that, you can avoid or reduce many of those additional costs, say the import taxes, say some of the port costs, etc. Obviously, you have generally lower labor rates in, say, an African country than you would in the United States or in Europe. So you're going to have cost savings there, but you're also creating jobs. You're also transferring skills and knowledge. You're transferring technology in our case because we came up with a new technology that we can transfer so that things can be made in Africa. And then little by little, you develop that ecosystem around the automotive production, or in this case, initially assembly, so that you can grow that economy. Because now there are many things that can be done in Africa. They have all of the skills, they have all of the trained labor to do all of this. What they don't have oftentimes is the ability to get going. So in our case, we intend to make as much of the car locally sourced. And by locally, I'm talking more regionally than a specific country. But there, yeah, I might not make an engine in Senegal because I don't have a foundry. I don't have, I can't do all that. But I can make a lot of parts for that car. locally. And initially, it may be simple things like the brush guard or the step or the windows or a seat frame or the roof rack. But little by little, you go from say 0% local content to 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. You create an ecosystem where you're not only creating the jobs that make the car, but also the ones for the sales system, the maintenance systems, the supply systems. You're giving work to local enterprises, and you end up with thousands of jobs that you've created in an economy. Um, that's a huge and very impactful thing. And all this simply because you're trying to solve a basic problem. How do I make a car affordable for what they need? I'm not going to change how they do things. I'm going to give them something that lets them do what they do. And what they do is they go either from a village to a town to sell their goods at market, or they're going from the village to the city because that's where they work most of the week, or they're going back home to visit their families from the cities. And
Yeah.
so you offer them solutions to a problem that they have. Just give me a car that will work, that will save me money, that's safe, and that I can afford to purchase.
I want to go back to that comment you made a little bit earlier about people driving vehicles, leaving them on the side of the road covered in dust, basically brand new vehicles that come from the United States. For anyone that's been to Africa, so I went to Tanzania last year, and it's true, that's exactly what you're going to see. Every vehicle you see driving on the road is around the early 2000s when we had vehicles that were built well, built strong with little technology, just a radio and enough to maybe have automatic windows. But those are the vehicles you're going to see around because they're the ones that last. They're the ones that they know how to fix. If you go buy a mechanic shop, you're going to see they have so much stuff ripped apart. And Frederick will talk about this a little bit later about their knowledge on they know exactly what engines are best for their continent and how to actually work on those engines. And he'll get into that a little bit later. I just wanted you to speak a little bit more about Oniva and how you guys are changing the body material because you can only fit so many actual bodies into a C can where you guys are going a whole different direction with this. So do you mind speaking a little bit
Sure.
on that side?
So, um, I mentioned earlier that most car bodies are primarily made out of steel. Now, in automotive history, we've seen car bodies that have been made of other materials: wood,
Mm-hmm.
plastic, fiberglass, carbon fiber. Those all have their pros and cons. Um, but one of the things that you mentioned in terms of how you efficiently ship things at low cost is if you have a car body that's already assembled, you can only put so many into a container,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what we did is, first of all, to solve the problem, we wanted a material that was not going to be affected by water and dust and all those things that can damage car bodies. Um, Secondly, we wanted a car body that was resistant to impacts, whether it's a rock flying up from the road because a truck passes you on a dirt road and a rock comes flying at you and hits your car body. And, in a steel body, you're going to have a big dent. So we wanted something resistant to that. But we also wanted something that's resistant to the weather, to heat. Obviously, it can be very hot
Mm-hmm.
in parts of Africa. Um, we were trying to come up with a car body that would avoid the problems that current car bodies have, and at the same time allow us to save money. And so what we did is we looked at other industries, because this is what I've done most of my life is I I look at one thing and I figure out, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Why reinvent the wheel? Could we apply that idea to a different world, to a different problem set?
Mm-hmm.
And I used to do that for many years, looking for technologies around the world, often seeing something that was designed for one purpose, but I would realize that it could be used in a completely different way. And so we did the same thing. And in the housing industry in the United States, in Canada, and parts of Northern Europe, they came up with a system that's called a SIP panel, a structurally insulated panel. So if you look at how houses are built in the United States, for example, what they call stick building, you'd see they lay their foundation and then they start putting up a frame made out of 2x4s and so forth and so on. So that's the sticks. And then on that frame, they start nailing OSB, oriented strand board, or plywood, basically the sheathing. And then afterwards, they put insulation, they put the drywall on the inside. They're doing this entire process of taking that frame and then putting stuff on it to finish your house out. But people realize that, well, wait a minute. If you take OSB and you take insulation, like think of it like styrofoam. So polystyrene XPS, extruded polystyrene is what it stands for. It's the stuff you'll see at the Home Depot or at Lowe's. It's usually green or pink, and it's like a big thick foam. So if you take those two elements and then add another layer of OSB and you glue it all together, you end up with this extremely strong material. It's called a SIP panel, a structurally insulated panel, which you can now cut in whatever way you want, put your window holes and so forth. You can bring them to your job site and basically connect all these together and boom, you have a house. You don't need all those steps and the stick building and so forth. Now, it's got its pros and cons, but the point is it was an idea that we said, well, why can't you make car bodies with the same concept? Can you make a sandwich panel car body that you could design in a shape with all the window holes and door holes and everything you need, and make a car body out of it? Obviously, you're not going to make it out of OSB. I mean, it's actually a great material. You could make a car that way if you lived in a dry climate, but not when things get wet, because if the water gets in there, it's going to decompose. So we looked for other materials, and that's where we looked at the aviation industry, the nautical industry. So there's materials that are called honeycomb structures. So these are very strong and very light. These are used a lot in airplanes, aviation, where you need a lot of strength, but you need it to be very light and have some flexibility, which with a car makes sense because you have torsional forces. You may not see it, but even that pickup truck frame is actually bending slightly. The torsional forces, vibrations, etc. So a honeycomb structure is really handy for that. And so we looked at that and we found some honeycomb structure materials that were very light, very cheap, relatively cheap. And so we started making sandwich materials, experimenting with different combinations of materials to come up with a sandwich that we could cut on a CNC machine the way we want with all the holes and things that we need. And then we realized, well, because of you have a car, you obviously want to add a lot of safety into your cars. And in Africa, not only do we want to improve maintainability and fuel efficiency, but also obviously we want cars that pollute a lot less than the ones they're using, but we want cars that are much safer than what they have. So in the case of Senegal, where we got going, we're going to be replacing 15,000 cars that are 30 some plus years old. They're old Peugeot 505 station wagons. So we got to come up with something that's definitely better than all of that in all those categories. And so inside of our panel structures, we have a frame. It can be made out of aluminum or steel. Depends on how much you want to pay and cost and so forth. But so you have a frame in your panel. But now, essentially, we can make what I call the IKEA car body. You can make your two sides, your roof, your floor, the back end, etc., all like panels, and basically put it into a flat pack. And now you can put a lot of these flat packs into a container, ship it to your assembly facility. And at the assembly facility, everything connects together. And then the next part of the process is, rather than having all those machines I mentioned that are super expensive for rust proofing and painting a car body, we use polyurea. So polyurea comes in thousands of formulations. It's used in many industries for many purposes. It's used by people, for example, in truck bed liners or people who want to have that beautiful garage floor. Those are
Yeah.
two different kinds of polyureas. It's used in the shipping industry. It's used in many ways, industrial roofs, etc. But the point is that you can have a product that is extremely strong, that is resistant to UV light. We put additives in it that also help it reflect energy coming from the sun in order to prevent the heat from coming into the car body. And we also inject an element into the polyurea that makes it fireproof to, I think it's something like 1500 degrees. So we end up with essentially a car body that can be shipped like an IKEA flat pack that you put
Yeah.
together, coat in polyurea, and you end up with a car body that doesn't dent, doesn't break, doesn't burn, and insulates. Because remember, that car body does have insulation in it. Um, and that's what we came up with, this system that in the end, I don't need that 50 or $100 million in machines just to rust proof and paint my body, let alone however much it costs to have the machines to make the car body.
For sure.
I can basically, with 2 orders of magnitude less in investment, so instead of 50 million, for $500,000, I got the machines I need to do everything. And so now I have the ability to make a car and sell it at a very decent profit without um, having to worry about how do I amortize that investment? How do I tell the investor that you'll start getting your money back in 2 years? And here's the profit margins, which by the way are approximately 40%. So, and people say, well, how can you do that with a car? Well, you can do it, one, for all the reasons I mentioned, but also because we're kind of going in the opposite direction of where the automotive industry has gone so far. So if you look at how the car industry has gone, for example, you'll hear in the news about a $2 billion investment to build a new factory in, I don't know, North Carolina or something.
Yeah.
And you're like, geez, $2 billion. You're going to have to make and sell a lot of cars to amortize that investment. And that's exactly what they do. You have a global supply chain, right? Just in time, brilliant stuff. You have a car factory that's essentially mostly automated, lots and lots of robots, which is great. You have huge quality control, excellent stuff. And you're making, I don't know, 100, 150,000, 200,000 cars a year in that one factory. So it's not hard to see that over a certain period of time, you're going to amortize that investment. You're going to pay that investment off with the money that you made. And after that, you're really making a profit.
For sure.
Well, we're doing something different because in Africa, they're moving towards an open system where you can go from country to country without paying tariffs and so forth and so on. But they're not quite there yet. So if I make a giant car factory in one country in Africa and then I have to export it to all these other countries, I haven't really solved the problem I was talking about. Remember, Africa is huge. So, if I make a car in South Africa and I export it to Senegal, that's like me making a car in the United States and exporting it to China.
Yeah.
Okay? The distances are enormous. So the costs savings from going from South Africa to Morocco are just not there. However, if I make a car factory in Senegal and my goal is just to feed the specific needs of Senegal and the surrounding countries, which is still a pretty good area, then I am going to look at things differently. I'm going to make a small car factory that can feed that market. And I'm going to make another car factory in another country that feeds that region. And so what we're doing is we're building small facilities that feed specific niche markets in different sub-regions. And that allows us to do a couple things. The investment required for each one of those is not very big. You can amortize the investment very quickly. And your profit margins are quite large because you're capturing markets that nobody else is going after. Ford Motor Company is not trying to get a 15,000 car market in Senegal for transporting people to villages
Yeah.
because they're building cars, hundreds of thousands of cars. If I go to Ford and I say, look, can I have your Ford Ranger platform? But I don't want electric windows, I don't want radios, and I don't want all those electronics. I just want the basic platform. Ford's going to say, look, it's too expensive for us to modify backwards, if you will, our
Yeah.
platform. Just buy what we got. Of course, buying what they got is not what's going to solve the problem. So we're going backwards in time also in the way the automotive industry has evolved. It has evolved to these giant mega factories that produce huge numbers of cars. That means you have to design a car that will work in as many places as possible, but it won't be just the right car for any of those places, to be honest. So you have one model of car that sells all over the world with slight modifications, and you'd make it on a huge scale and you move it around the world. And that's fine. That works for the US. It works for Europe. That's great. It doesn't work for Africa.
Yeah.
We are going back to when the automotive industry started, and you had lots of brands, lots of small cars, and they tended to focus on specific kinds of cars. You know, the guy who made great delivery vehicles, the guy who made
Yeah.
a great small sedan, the guy who made a great luxury sedan. And we focus on niche markets. Most of our vehicles aren't at the moment uh, a family car. It's a car to
Mhm.
transport people, to transport goods, refrigerated goods, or for specialty vehicles like ambulances and mobile clinics and all those things that actually help solve real problems that Africans have.
Yeah. No, I'm a huge fan. I think everyone that listening to this will be a fan of the inspiration behind what you guys are doing. Just because it doesn't just help the individual within these countries. It helps the whole economy. You're making jobs where people can go work. You're getting different experiences, and you're bringing it back down to simplicity, which is what we need in a continent like this. Is just something simple that works. We don't need all these fancy technologies. It just has to work. Um, so what you guys are doing is truly amazing. Taking a simple chassis body vehicle, super simple interior, maybe probably roll up windows, just like when I was in Tanzania we went on the safaris, and they are Toyota Land Cruiser safari vehicles, but the only piece of technology they have within them is obviously lights and then maybe a cooler at the back so you can keep your drinks cold when you're safaring. But that was the basics of these safari vehicles because they make them so simple.
So, I mean, our vehicles could come with electric windows. That's not a problem. But we
Yeah.
purposely chose the manual hand crank window um, because you pop the panel off the door, and you know there's like three or four pieces to the mechanism for a roll up window.
Yeah.
So if your window breaks during the rainy season, or if your window breaks when you're in the Sahara, you really want to be able to do something with it. If you've got, I don't know, a bad switch or the motor broke, you're screwed. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you might be able to yank it up with your hands, but it's not very pretty. Whereas with a hand crank window, I can pop that panel off, and it doesn't take even a mechanically inclined person to figure out, oh, I see how this works. I can fix this. At a
Yeah.
minimum, I can put my window up if I need to, or I can put it down if I need to manually.
Yeah.
Um, so,
And
but it's interesting you mentioned the cooler. So I mentioned that our car bodies are insulated, and that in
mhm,
addition, in the polyurea, we put a product in there that helps actually increase its reflectivity in terms of the solar energy. And
yeah.
the result is that with our air conditioning, by the way, we do have air conditioning in our vehicles.
Mhm.
Um, ABS, electronic brake distribution, air conditioning. Okay, we do have some stuff, but I don't have a radio because it's not worth the engineering and cost of putting a radio in when I can give you a Bluetooth speaker. I'll give it to you for free. You got all the
Yeah.
music you want on that smartphone. And in Africa, the smartphone is the internet.
Yeah.
Everybody's got one, and they have some really cool ones too. So they're connected. Um, all the music I need is in my hand.
Yeah.
So we do put Bluetooth hotspots, or rather, Wi-Fi hotspots in the vehicles for the public transport ones. Um,
Amazing.
we can put satellite links if we want. We can put
Yeah.
sensors on the vehicles. The vehicles are platforms that solve problems. But that cooler that you mentioned, because the vehicle's already insulated, simply the difference between our passenger model and our refrigerated model, if you want to call it that, is that there's a wall between the driving compartment and the back, and there are no
Okay.
windows. And
That's awesome.
with the two-zone AC system that we have, and the rear AC system is just a bar that blows in the
Hmm.
back, we can keep the back refrigerated. We don't have to come up with a new vehicle. It's already refrigerated.
Yeah.
And the result of that is really important. So in Africa, there's a lot of productivity actually in the agricultural sector. It can always improve, of course.
Yeah.
But if you were to be going around right now in parts of West Africa, you'll see a lot of food on the ground and it's rotting. Why?
Yeah.
They don't have the transportation, and they certainly don't have the cold chain capability to transport their produce either to a market or to a processing center in good condition. And
Yeah.
so in some countries, you'll lose up to 40 to 60% of the produce that you just invested all that time
Wow.
growing. And that's a real pity.
Hmm.
Um, Africa can feed itself. That's not the issue. The part of the problem is they simply don't have the transport systems, the vehicles, the roads, etc., to get the produce to market and then to process it. That's where the value added takes place.
For
Instead,
sure.
many agricultural products like cocoa, I mean, right? Cocoa gets exported and all that gets processed elsewhere.
Hmm.
Why is there only one chocolate making company in Ghana when most of the world's cocoa beans come from there? Because the
Yeah.
system was set up by others who designed it to extract certain things, whether it's minerals or cocoa, and
Hmm.
take it somewhere else where you have all the value added. And that's where the wealth is created.
Yeah.
And we like to see, I guess the way I see it is this is where my political science hat comes in. I used to be in the Defense Department and I worked defense issues.
Yeah.
Um, if people are concerned about migration today, they ain't seen nothing yet. I mentioned that Africa is growing population to 2.5 billion from 1.5 billion. And all this in the amount of time that, some people have been alive, 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
Well, if I have a very young, very connected, much more educated, much more aware population that doesn't have jobs, doesn't see opportunities, and feels like it's getting screwed by the rest of the world, I'm sorry, I don't want to see a world where I see over 1 billion pissed off young people saying, "Well, then I'm coming to where you are. I mean, I need a job.
Yeah.
I need to feed my family." I would rather that they create this vibrant Africa that is not only leveraging this amazing entrepreneurship that they have, but at the same time because it becomes an even bigger market for companies from other countries. It should be a global system that Africa is a part of, not just as a supplier of basic raw materials. They have to
For sure.
create wealth in Africa to feed Africa. And to be honest, if you want the rest of the world to be stable, then you don't want over 1 billion pissed off young people saying, "Screw it, I'm coming to where you are because I don't have anything here."
Yeah. Definitely. If we can take one step, and that starts with what you guys are doing, right? You're building up the economy. You're giving them vehicles. You're giving them stuff they need to move the economy forward within, and especially with this younger generation coming up. If they don't have anything and they don't see success, they're gonna try to move around and be pissed off, like you said. So,
They
um,
won't have a choice. I mean,
no,
you're in your 20s. What would you do if you had absolutely no opportunities here in the United States? You
you'd
would
have to
eventually say,
move
I
and
gotta
find.
go somewhere. I
Yeah,
gotta eat.
yeah,
Maybe you have to
no,
take care of your mom or your sister,
yeah,
or, I mean, in Africa, these things are very important. You have family responsibilities, and they're very strong. It's not like you just leave the nest and that's it. No, you have responsibilities, and they take them
yeah,
seriously. That's
yeah.
part of the
No,
culture.
it's a big challenge that I love that you guys are tackling. I love what you guys are doing. I love the word and the inspiration behind it. Um, I have one more question to ask you, and that is, how can people get in contact with you? How can people um,
So
get understand more about the mission and help out with what you guys are trying to do? Because it is truly
the
amazing.
easiest thing to do is if you go to our website, which is www.oniva, Oniva motors.com. You can reach us through there. There's contact information. You can send email. We also have a LinkedIn presence. And I'm not the communications person, so I don't know all the other ways to get a hold of us, but I can tell you for sure that through the website and through LinkedIn, you can get a hold of us. I was going to mention one other thing.
Yeah.
For people that are listening to this and saying, I wonder if I could be involved. And the answer is yes. Let me explain a couple ways to do that. So we're a U.S. company, Oniva LLC. We do business as Oniva Motors. Obviously, as a U.S. company, we're trying to capitalize so that we can fund operations in Africa.
Yep.
But we actually have companies in Africa. Think of these as the operating companies. They're actually independent companies. We try to always ensure that they are a minimum of 30% local capital investment in those companies. Why? Because a guy who's made a lot of money in Senegal knows how to make money in Senegal.
Mm-hmm.
He's also worked very hard to get that money. And like any investor, if he invests in something, he's going to do his utmost to make sure he doesn't lose his money. So it's a risk reduction strategy, but it's also a way to make sure that there is skin in the game from the locals. This is not Americans or Westerners coming to solve everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
we're coming to work with you and solve problems with you. And this is what we bring to the table. But in the end, the work is going to be done in Africa by Africans for Africans to solve African problems. So you can also look at funding, investing in these companies. So there's one in Senegal called Oniva Motors Senegal, and there's one in Benin right now, Oniva Motors Benin. And those are the operating companies, if you will, the assembly production companies. That's where the real work gets done. And that's where, if we get money in the US, we're going to be investing it to get their production facilities up and running. And that was the other thing I wanted to mention, that we really have looked at this holistically. We've talked about the car business, and we've talked about solving a problem, the car problem, which itself helps solve other problems. You mentioned in your very beginning that we were an environmentally responsible company, etc. We are.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, that body I told you about, and obviously anything that's in the car that's made of steel, this is a fully recyclable car. So we do look at a full life cycle of a vehicle so that eventually, when these cars eventually have to be taken off the road, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I mean, hopefully our cars will be like the ones we're replacing and will last 40 years. But even then, you would want probably a car that's even more fuel efficient or even more better with pollution than what we have, because
Yeah.
technology will permit that. Maybe we'll be able to go to electric vehicles, which is another discussion we could have. So we are also ensuring that everything we do is done in a way that makes sense in Africa and that doesn't simply, just like we can import good ideas from other parts of the world into Africa, unfortunately, we can also import bad ideas. So I'll give you an example. Cement is a wonderful product. It's an amazing product. And you have seen cement factories be established in Africa. They're dominated by certain countries, Western countries. Um, and if you look at construction, you'll see a lot of stuff is made out of cement. A lot of stuff is made out of cement. But the problem with that is cement also has some downsides, both in terms of everything that goes into making the cement itself is very polluting. But then the cement itself has some properties to it, such as, retaining humidity inside of a cement building, right?
Yeah.
It can get musty and fungus, and it's probably not the best thing. You'll see a lot of buildings in terms of the industrial sector where you have maybe cement walls and like a corrugated metal roof. Well,
Mhm.
that doesn't work so well when it's 100 degrees outside. It gets really hot inside and stuffy. It's not a healthy work environment. So we have looked at doing something that's actually been done for thousands of years, but now has been improved um, recently, modern times. They do it a lot in India. You're seeing a lot more of it now in the United States, especially in the Southwest, and it's called compressed earth blocks. So basically what we're doing is we're making blocks, bricks, if you will, out of the earth from the location that we're in. When your soils are sifted and mixed, and you add a little bit of cement, 5%, 10% max, and you end up with what's called a compressed earth block or a compressed earth stabilized block. These things are extremely durable, extremely strong. They're fireproof, they're bulletproof, they're waterproof,
Mhm.
and you're making it from the soil of your build site. So you're cutting down on all of the trucking transportation to bring in, for example, all that cement or all the bricks
Yeah.
or all the other stuff. You're making all this yourself, and you're creating beautiful buildings that are repurposeful, can be repurposed. So rather than a
Yep.
big giant whatever million square foot building, we're building smaller buildings for each part of the process, so that if one of these small facilities somewhere, maybe they've fulfilled the market requirements,
Mhm.
whatever is happening, everything can be repurposed. Um, and that is a great risk reduction measure also. But it also
Amazing.
creates
Yeah.
another revenue stream. It also creates now the ability to get another industry growing, which
Yeah.
is making those compressed earth blocks, having the people who know how to do that, and building buildings that way. Now, there's already some of this going on in Africa, but we want to do it on a much larger scale and showcase what you can do with compressed earth blocks. But again, we are a for-profit company. We're not an aid development agency.
Mhm.
We believe the profit motive is important, with a caveat that capitalism and profit is a great motivator, but that a company and a system like that needs to not just take care of its shareholders. It's not just shareholder value. It's You have to keep in mind all of your stakeholders, and your stakeholders are not just your shareholders. They're your employees, they're your clients, they're the
Yeah.
governments that enable you to have those tax breaks. They're all of those things. And so a healthy company can make a huge profit in a ginormously growing market space where you're fulfilling this enormous requirement, this demand for vehicles, um, and still pay attention to all your stakeholders, not just the short term shareholder value. And so we always look at all of those things that can ensure that an investment will always give you a return over a long period of time, and that you can at least get your initial ROI back within 2 to 3 years. And we do this through the way we make things, through the way we design things, through the factories we build, etc. We really do try to take a holistic picture. Here's another example. In Senegal, we have 10 hectares. So that's 30 acres or so, something like
Yeah.
that, 20 some acres. Why? We don't need that much space for just our production facility. But you
Yeah.
don't have testing tracks for automotive safety performance in most of these countries. So we want to enable the growth or the development of standards in these countries for automotive performance, automotive safety, etc., that applies to their realities, and then offer a place for that to be done. And that's why we have more land, because we will be building a test facility on our land. And obviously that could also be another revenue generator, because if you develop standards and you need to have things tested, then where do you do that? Well, in this case, you do it with Oniva. By the way, Oniva is a play on words. So because we got started in Senegal, where the main Western language is French, Oniva means let's go.
Yeah.
But we took the sound of it and turned it into a word. It's not spelled the way you would say in French, on y va. But and in French, you can do all sorts of things like on y va avec Oniva. Let's go with Oniva. So that's what Oniva stands for. It's to move forward, and it's to get things done. It's to solve problems, but to do so in a way that motivates people. And that includes having a healthy profit.
For sure. Yeah, you gotta, even though you're looking out for a good cause, you're making a good cause, you still need to have a driver behind it. If people aren't making money, if that's a big driver for a lot of people, right, is money. A lot of drivers for people is helping other people as well. So if you can add both of those together, you're gonna have a team that can truly drive results for somewhere that truly needs help, somewhere people can make a little bit of extra cash and know they're having a huge impact, not only on the continent, but on the whole world in general. It affects us. It affects Europe. It affects everywhere, not only Africa in general. So
we have had a lot of interest, by the way, in Latin America, where you still have countries that have similar problems. We've had inquiries from other parts of the world, including Asia, and even some countries in the Middle East. So the concepts that we're talking about are not unique to Africa, but that's where we focus the most because we think we can have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time. And the need is great. You mentioned how people can make a little bit of money. So I mentioned that the vehicles right now that we make are targeted towards niche markets. They're targeted to people who use vehicles to make a living. So the guys who transport passengers, say from the city to the village, those are usually either owner operators or think of it like a small long distance cab company. That small business might have 5 vehicles or 10 vehicles. So he's making his living from those vehicles. His margins are very, very narrow. This is why in many countries, these vehicles, usually the business model is based on X number of passengers that fit in a vehicle. In Senegal, it's 7. In other countries, it's 10 or more. But the point is that you don't go to, and they're like bus stations where these vehicles are. So you go and here's the vehicle that's going from A to B, and I'm going to B. There's a sort of a schedule. It'll leave around 2 p.m.
Yeah.
But the way it works is I can't leave until I have my passenger load, because if I don't have that load, I can't make money. I will lose money, and my profit margins are so thin that I can't afford to do that. So if I have a vehicle that in a business model that's designed to take 7 passengers, I can't leave with 5 passengers.
Yeah.
If I have 6, I might tell everybody else, hey, if you guys are willing to chip in for that 7th seat, we'll take off.
Yeah.
But the point is that these vehicles are oriented to people who use them to make a living, and they hire more people. So again, anything that we do that helps solve this problem helps with a lot of secondary and tertiary benefits to other people who themselves then can help others. Mm-hmm. Even if their motive is profit, they're still ending up helping. whether it's getting somebody to where they need to go at a reasonable price, or whether it's, hey, I now have 5 vehicles and I need to hire some drivers. Well, you just created some jobs,
Yeah,
etc. I need more mechanics. I need this. I need that. This is the thing with these kinds of industries, housing, automotive, etc., is they have all of these downstream effects that are positive throughout an economy. And we're
for sure.
focusing on those parts that people really need now.
I love it. The mission behind Oniva is crazy. The wording that you guys came up with the French with Oniva, let's go. That is it's a great, it just adds into the story, right? So um I really hope that there's some people that watch this right to the very end, really learn about Oniva, really learn about yourself, the mission that you guys have, and put something towards it and helping our world come kind of back together, get full circle again, because we seem to keep scaling, 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 where we have continents and countries that keep falling down when we keep going up. It just doesn't work out properly. So, um, if anyone watching this, reach out to Frederick, reach out to Oniva, because and now I'm saying it in French. Reach out to Oniva and and just help people out at the end of the day, because it's going to make you feel way better as a person, as an individual, as a person, knowing it's going towards a good cause that is truly going to make a difference within a continent, within a country, within a community, within an individual's life. So, Frederick, thank you for speaking on this. I really want to make a part two on this as well, so we can get the word out there just a little bit more. But
Yeah, I'd be
thank you
glad
for
to.
taking the time and
Think
sharing
about
the
this.
story.
So Neva is a platform that solves a problem, but you can do a lot with it. Just as a last parting thing, as we talk to investors, some of them say, well, what do you do with AI? Or what do you do with communications? Because that's what they want to put money into.
Yeah,
And what I tell them is, as a platform in an environment that we have very little data on, it's a great data gathering tool. We had always intended to put, for example, sensors on the vehicles that can gather data. Where's the potholes? Where do people get on? Where do people get off? Where's this? Where's that? There's a lot of data that you can collect that AI would be really good at processing so that you can learn a lot and then develop other business opportunities. I mentioned we're going to be putting Wi-Fi hotspots on our vehicles because some of these trips can be 7, 8 hours long, and people, they have a USB port in our vehicles so they can plug in and they can be doing stuff. But, you know, could we use the vehicles as I don't know, a mobile internet? I don't know. I don't know enough about those technologies, but I throw ideas out there that if people want to look at how to work with Oniva to do other things, that's good too. Our goal is to get enough capital to deliver on the orders that we already have. We already have 5,600 pre-orders just in Senegal. And unfortunately, we don't have the capital to deliver those vehicles because you need to prime the pump and we need that capital to deliver the vehicles. But the vehicles, if somebody is interested in other things and is willing to put a little bit of money in, we're more than willing to work with them. Our goal, like I said, is yes, to make a profit, but to do so solving real problems. I hope so. I hope so. I mean, our projections are if we are successful, within 6 years, we'll have a $1.2 billion company. And
That's
that's
what we
just hitting a
protect to
tiny
everyone.
percentage of the market. That's just a small percent of the market. That's just West
Yeah,
Africa.
that's crazy. Yeah. And I just want to come full circle again because so I know you have to run, but we'll make this quick. So earlier we talked about the price of a vehicle after you import it. You get a used vehicle, you're going to end up spending 30 grand. you mind breaking down the pricing structure for an Oniva vehicle and what they're going to be spending on something like that?
So most of our vehicles are in the $15,000 range, new with a warranty.
Wow.
Basically, we can make a vehicle and sell it for $15,000, which is about the price of an okay used vehicle imported into these countries. Except ours is new and has a warranty. And we've already developed, in the case of Senegal, where we have our market most developed, a complete system for parts, for maintenance, and for sales. But basically, yeah, we're talking about a $15,000 vehicle. Obviously, that's subject to some factors like the cost of shipping, some components that we have to bring in, and obviously, if the motors and things that we have to purchase themselves go up in price, we have to pass that on. But in general, right now, they're in the $15,000 range. And that nets us approximately, depending on the vehicle, but in the neighborhood of 40% profit margin, which we reinvest in the company so that we don't need to seek financing and so that we can do other things, develop more models. One thing I forgot to mention, by the way, because we're a body on frame system at the moment, not a unibody system, the platform, the mechanical platform, is essentially always pretty much the same, other than you can have a two-wheel drive or a four-wheel drive version. But the body can be configured in any special way that you want. So, if you need the roof line higher, that's no big deal for us. If you need the roof line lower, that's no big deal. If you need a king cab versus a regular cab, if you want it like a mobile medical clinic or an ambulance, that's not a big deal for us because when you really think about it, it's a box on top of a frame. Obviously, it looks a little prettier than a box, but conceptually, you're basically building a box that you put on a frame. And so we can make that box any way you want. And that's why we can cater to these niche markets. Whereas your typical car company with a steel body, well, that's a little different. At a minimum, you're going to have to redesign that body, including structural elements, and you're going to have to change the molds that you use to stamp out those body parts. That's expensive. That's a lot of money, which is why you don't see your average car company saying, yeah, sure, I'll make you 100 of those.
Yep.
Or 50 of those, or what have you. So you mentioned safaris. We'd love to make safari vehicles. We'd love to take our four-wheel drive version and make safari vehicles and sell those to the different safari companies or to the tourism industry for, whatever, doing their passenger transport or their tourism. We can do that. We can focus on those niche markets that other companies probably just can't do so very easily and affordably.
Mm-hmm. No, it's truly an amazing product, truly an amazing mission. Frederick, I can't thank you enough. We'll definitely have to make a part 2 of this. But
yeah, be glad to.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for all your questions, and thank you to anybody who's listening out there. By all means, get a hold of us if you're interested, even if you just want to know more about the company and things that we're doing. By all means, reach out to us.
And share the message too, because it's a game changer.
Yeah, and if you have